All right, so moving right ahead, here is the agenda for today. We're going to start off by walking through just a definition of equity to make sure we're all on the same page. We'll talk a little bit about this resource hub that we've developed. And then, of course, we'll be diving right into green development standards and how we can be applying an equity lens to it. We will share a few examples of some successful implementation of GDS. And then we'll be going into breakout rooms so that we get some time to share and talk amongst each other. And that's about it for the workshop. So we're going to start off by talking through what is equity. And I'm sure all of you have different understandings. There are so many different definitions. But for today's purposes, we're going to be talking about climate equity in terms of addressing the unequal burdens made worse by climate change while ensuring that all people share the benefits of climate protection. Achieving equity means that all people live in safe, healthy, and fair communities. Additionally, an equitable region is one in which everybody can prosper and participate in their communities and where benefits and burdens are shared fairly. You'll hear us talking today about this term equity seeking or equity deserving groups. These terms are pretty much interchangeable, and they refer to people with disabilities, women, racialized groups, queer communities, low-income individuals, youth, and seniors. And there's this term as well, which is important, climate change vulnerability. It refers to the degree to which individuals and places are at risk from climate change and their ability to cope with those impacts. Now, these equity-seeking groups that we just mentioned, these are the folks who are going to be and are currently being disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so these are the groups that we really need to be keeping in mind when we're thinking about implementing whatever climate action we're implementing through an equity lens. So applying an equity lens to climate action means considering the impacts of climate change on different communities and ensuring that the benefits of the solutions are being distributed fairly. And really, this is a win-win-win situation. It is so important to remember that when we're implementing these actions or these policies through an equity lens, there can be countless co-benefits. For example, we can improve the livelihoods for everybody, in particular the equity-deserving communities. We can create healthier, safer, and more accessible communities for everybody. We can even start to address deeper issues like the oppression that many folks continue to face. We can advance anti-racism and reconciliation initiatives. And just generally, we can build stronger public support for climate action. So if you feel like trying to implement this equity lens is maybe not really worth it or too much work, you can really think back and remember, wow, this is going to actually have so many co-benefits that can help a lot of people. So it's very, very important. So back in November, the Clean Air Partnership held our very first workshop, which was kind of took place just before we began this series. So we talked just generally about climate and equity synergies and what that looks like, what that entails. And out of that workshop came this resource hub talking about climate and equity synergies. And the intention of this hub is for it to just be constantly updated and growing and expanding as we take in input from all of you through these workshops and engage in all these crowdsourcing efforts so that we can make it bigger and better. I hope somebody can put it's already in there, a link to the resource hub in the chat, and we really encourage you to take a look at it after the workshop if you haven't seen it already. It's quite extensive. We talk through equity generally, and then we run through all of these different climate actions, GDS being one of them. There's a ton of examples in there, and hopefully it can be a helpful resource for you as you're trying to implement or work through your own municipal climate action plan. And I just want to reiterate that we are really not experts on equity and climate, but we are trying to facilitate these conversations, bring together the collective learning of all of us, and apply these learnings across the Clean Air Council network. So we're really hoping to hear from you today, later on, as much as possible, so we can try to add your input to this resource hub and make it better and better. Okay, so diving right into the focus of today, which is, of course, green development standards. And I'm sure that all of you already know what these refer to, but just wanted to still provide some background information. So green development standards are developed by municipalities to encourage developers and builders to use sustainable design, which considers the principles of economic, social, and ecological sustainability. They are comprehensive principles to guide development at a level of planning and design that focuses on the entire community. So they're not focused on individual buildings, for instance, but they're focused on the community as a whole. Green development standards are a tool for municipalities to implement their official plans. And what comes to mind may be simply energy codes or standards, but GDS refers to a lot more things than just energy codes. And actually, we'll get to that in the next slide. So as you can see here, green development standards cover a whole host of things, from soil health to tree canopy and EV charging and active transportation. And this is all in addition to trying to lower greenhouse gas emissions. So I think one of the most important things about GDS are that what they're doing is really bringing together all of these different standards and consolidating them into one set. And this really reduces the complexity for developers and builders and simplifies the process. I also just wanted to share a few really, really great quotes. So to start off, an environmentally sustainable solution is not really sustainable if it is not equally accessible to all. Moreover, if health and economic benefits are unevenly distributed, the disparities in access and opportunity that form the basis of social justices are reinforced. And the way we build and the strategies we employ can either continue to worsen social issues or can lay the groundwork for significant progress to be made. So again, really talking about why equity is so important and why we have such an amazing opportunity with green development standards to make living situations better for everybody, in particular the equity-seeking communities. I think there's one final quote. So as one looks around the work tables or work sites of the sustainable and regenerative building sector, there's little representation of the populations most impacted by our current proliferation of unsustainable, inefficient, sometimes unsafe, and often unhealthy building stock. The most impacted communities are underrepresented in the design, construction, and occupancy of sustainable, regenerative, healthy buildings. So it's really, really emphasizing the need to be bringing these equity deserving folks into the conversation and making sure we're prioritizing them when we are working on anything to do with the building sector and making things more sustainable and regenerative. All right, so I would like to encourage all of you to go to this jot form link that's in the chat. We're going to be using that a bunch today. What we're going to be doing is sharing some sections from this resource hub that I just mentioned. So in the resource hub, we came up with this list of top-level questions that you can apply to any climate action. So for today, we're applying that to green development standards. And this is the part where we would really, really love your input. So we have these top-level questions, and we've tried to answer all of them. And we took this directly from the hub and kind of shortened it a little bit. But as we're going through each of these, we want you to be thinking did we miss anything? And if we did, please put that down onto the jot form. We want to try to expand this section as much as possible and get as many answers up here as we can. So as we're going through and as you're listening, really encourage you to keep that jot form open and note down anything that you would like to add. So if you do have any questions about that, please just put them in the chat, and I'm going to dive right into the first question. So when we're thinking about green development standards, of course, the first question that you're going to ask is, what are you trying to achieve with this action? And when it comes to GDS, there are so many benefits that can result from applying this equity lens. So first of all, of course, we can increase the uptake of sustainability metrics within these new communities. We can improve the comfort of our homes and resilience when there's extreme weather events. We can support seniors and those who are vulnerable transportation users. We can also expand the green economy locally. We can reduce energy poverty. We can improve health and wellness for everybody. And finally, we can reduce the risks associated with stranded assets or increasing energy costs over time. So there are so many things, great things that can result from GDS. The next question, who has traditionally been benefiting from green development standards? Typically, this tends to be middle and high income folks, specifically property owners and residents of new developments. It's really important then when we go to question number 3, which is asking what groups are most in need of this action. And remember that the answer to this question often is different than the answer to number 2. And we can see here that while it's the middle and high income folks who are typically benefiting from GDS, vulnerable communities, especially those experiencing energy poverty, are the ones who are really in need of green development standards. So this is so important when we're thinking about how to implement, how to plan for GDS, questioning who needs them the most and how can we make sure those communities are benefiting from them. And again, just as a reminder, as I'm walking through all of these questions, if anything comes to mind that you're not seeing up here on the screen, please go ahead and put that into the jot form. So the fourth question is, what has prevented these groups from participating in the past? When it comes to green development standards, the biggest barrier tends to be these upfront capital costs because GDS metrics often can cause the housing construction costs to go up. And it's also important to remember the longer term operational costs. So number 5, what design can address the barriers for those most in need? Things like green loans can be really helpful to try to reduce that upfront capital increase, as well as changing mortgage lending rules so that it's accounting for the lower operational costs. And number 6, can you identify any negative impacts that this action may cause? Again, kind of repeating what was said in question 4, it really comes down to these upfront capital costs that can have a negative impact on housing affordability. This is especially problematic for folks who are at the edge of moving into the high-risk mortgage bracket. This can really complicate things for them. However, there is limited ability for this policy to address the housing affordability issue. That's really a much bigger problem with a lot of different factors at play. And so GDS is not really going to be able to address that all on its own, at least not in the short term. So that's something to consider as well. And the next question. So what can we do to actually prevent this harm from happening? So again, kind of repeating, mortgage lenders can consider these lower operational costs for the purchasers of more efficient homes. In addition, things like green loans, LICs, can help to address this upfront capital cost increase. And municipalities are so important here because they can play this bridge role with the developers at the neighborhood level. And they can work to really reduce those upfront capital costs and try to improve the business case for lower carbon developments. So there are potential risks or problems that can come with implementing GDS, but there are things that municipalities can try to do to mitigate those problems for sure. And finally, who has not been engaged that would be good to engage? So when we're talking about equity, we're constantly talking about the importance of consultation, specifically with these equity-seeking groups. And we need to be asking as well, who are we including in that consultation process? What formats are we using? For instance, are we talking to them on the phone? Are we going door to door? Are we sending out surveys? Things like that. What languages are we using? And at what point in the process are we engaging them? Is it only once and then that's it? Or are we coming back and continually talking with the communities in this more iterative process? So really important that we're hearing from the folks who need these policies the most. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I hope some folks did have the opportunity to go through that JOT form as I was talking and put in some of your own thoughts if you could identify something that was missing from that list. And I'm not sure if we are going to be showing the results of the JOT form. Okay.
So this JOT form is a new thing we're trying actually. So this is actually enabling you that you could submit your input and then go back to that URL and put more input back in if you wanted to. So one of the things that we were having an issue with Menti is that as soon as we went across into the next question, people could no longer provide input into past questions. So that's one of the things we're trying to address using JOT form is that you can submit, we can't see the results of it. Actually wonder Devanshi, if you throw this URL in, I wonder if other people can see the results that are coming in from it. I wonder, or if you'd have to log in. I'm curious. Let's run a little experiment.
I think you have to log in.
Okay.
It wouldn't.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right.
But we see inputs coming, so we can go over each question one by one.
Oh, interesting. I didn't get around the accommodating disability needs. That's really interesting. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, exactly why we're doing this crowdsourcing. Devanshi, is there a way to kind of expand each column so we can see the
probably
full
let's
answer?
go one at a time. Let's do number one and scroll down. Because we can see only the top 6 or 7.
That's all we've received.
And we can't see the full answer, I think.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. We're running a little, let's see. Okay. Maladaptation. I was wondering if someone who can provide a little bit of information on that one. Is it with regards to what kind of be would the concerns on maladaptation be? And just to get a little bit more digging into that one.
I'm not sure if anybody else put it in there, but I added maladaptation. Basically just with when we're thinking of green development standards or even more widely, any standards that would be used to kind of combat some of the climate change concerns, making sure that any actions we put into place or interventions that we implement are not improving things for one demographic or one population while also making things more challenging for another.
I get you. Yeah. Green development standards is a challenging one on the equity front. I know then when we were doing that kind of internal reviewing, like the fact that green development standards are geared towards new developments that are often on the market price it is really challenging for green development standards to achieve equity goals in terms of housing affordability, because there's a housing affordability issue we're facing that green development standards cannot address. Like, the housing affordability challenge is far bigger than green development standards. And this is just being added into consideration to advance the sustainability of new developments, but it's still not addressing the housing affordability issue that we all face within our communities. And that's where I think the inclusionary zoning is particularly important, and where there's some opportunities where it would be worth a kind of like a little bit more of a discussion at some point in time on how could green development standards and inclusionary zoning come together, or what's the, or how could they support each other? Not that they have to come together, but how could they support each other? It is just something that I know that came to mind when we were kind of completing some of the initial ideas on this question, is that it was really challenging for green development standards to achieve equity goals, because immediately new developments and new property sales are geared towards a demographic who can afford to buy property.
Definitely. And thanks to everybody for putting in your answers here. I think we'll probably go to the next question, which was, who has been traditionally benefiting from green development standards? So looks like, yeah, those builders that qualify for rebates and subsidies, developers who understand energy efficiency, and then also talking about whiteness as well. Very important, because when we're talking about middle to high income folks, who does that typically refer to in terms of race and religion and even gender, things like that. So those are really great points. Thanks all for putting those in. The next question is, who is most in need of this action? Affordable housing organizations. Yeah, Indigenous nations, folks with disabilities, definitely. And the fourth one was, what has prevented these groups from participating in the past? And Gabby, feel free to jump in.
I was just looking at the land use planning has segregated vulnerable and equity deserving groups. I think that's definitely something that a lot of communities have learned. In the past, traditionally social housing was identified in one, or put into one specific area, and not integrated into the community as a whole. That is definitely changing as new affordable housing is being advanced within municipalities, and the recognition of the importance of mixing incomes and housing across, and not just putting social housing all together in one location, because often it means that if you're going to be doing that, those communities never get the supports that they need on the longer term to maintain and support that community over time. So I think that I was really glad to see that being raised in there about something that's really important in terms of advancing affordable housing within the community. Knowledge of the local development building community and understanding. Yes, that's definitely a challenge.
And I'm seeing folks raise inclusionary zoning, as Gabby just mentioned too, and that's really alluding to one of the examples that we'll be talking about later on today. Okay, I think we can jump to, what question are we on? Number 5. Number 5 was, what design can address the barriers for those most in need? So leveraging the role of incentives.
And I think the one of the kind of performance-based contracts where costs of improvements, energy efficiency upgrades are paid for by the energy savings. I wanted to highlight that because that's one of the things that's really important with green development standards, is often just, even when we think, oh, we're going to be moving from fossil fuels to electricity in order to achieve our GHG reduction goals, or adding in low impact development to address our climate resilience goals, that that can lead towards increases in upfront capital costs. But I wanted to kind of highlight the reason it leads to the options for, or the potential for increasing upfront capital cost is we don't have a system in place that could provide those energy efficiency benefits over time. Let's say, for example, we have utilities who can bring in all the pay for all the costs associated with bringing in those pipelines, bringing in all of that electricity into communities, and then users and ratepayers pay for that investment to bring that energy supply to that property over a course of time, and therefore it doesn't add to upfront capital costs. And if we had more of those low carbon energy utilities offering those energy efficiency benefits, or advancing geothermal district energy systems, or passive house standards, or whatever we do to advance or address, like, not that we're going to have a utility for low impact development, but stormwater kind of requirements in terms of incorporating low impact development into your development cost studies is a critical piece for enabling municipalities to get developers to implement LID and get that paid for by development charges. So there's a system that needs to be changed, because one of the challenges limiting green development standards uptake is it's not part of the inherent system of development as it's traditionally been. So it's a new process that developers need to bring into play in advancing their developments. And sometimes there's not a whole lot of support systems for developers to advance these green development standard metrics. So it does kind of raise about like how we got to think about it from the perspective of addressing systemic barriers that, let's say, for example, developers are facing in advancing the metrics in green development standards and driving further ambition and uptake of green development standard metrics.
Thanks for sharing that, Gabby. I think we're going to go back to the presentation and move on because I want to make sure we have enough time for our breakout rooms, but just to let folks know, so what we're going to be doing is taking all of these answers that you all just submitted in the JOT form and going over them and inputting all of that into the resource hub so that we're making sure that your voices are being heard, and that that's really going to help us improve the hub. So thanks to everyone so much for contributing. And I believe the form is just going to remain open, right? So if you have more thoughts that you didn't get time to share, you can put those in anytime throughout the rest of the workshop today. So we did want to share a few examples of GDS being implemented throughout Ontario municipalities. And the first of these is the Whitby Green Development Standards. They've done a fantastic job of incorporating equity. You can see here, I just took a little screenshot from their page on the Whitby Green Standard principles. And I thought it was so cool how they reference health and happiness as one metric, equity and local economy as another, and culture and community. And I also, on the next slide, incorporated a little segment right from their site plan application checklists. And you can see here that equity and local economy is one of the performance measures that they require. So really, really good job Whitby is doing at bringing equity into their GDS planning. And I think the more municipalities that start bringing this in, the easier it's going to be to replicate with other municipalities as it becomes more common practice. And the second example to share was from the City of Toronto. They also explicitly mention equity in their green development standards. And what they mention is that implementing equity can lead to more affordable housing, affordable developments. It can lead to higher quality public spaces and can lead to more resilient housing. So Toronto is also doing a commendable job integrating an equity lens into this plan. And the third example was, before that. So these are all the municipalities in Ontario currently with green development standards. So as you can see, it's really proliferating throughout Ontario and becoming more common practice. So that's really positive and exciting to see. I think that brings us to our third example. Okay, so the third example, which is something that Gabby and other folks had been mentioning already, which is about inclusionary zoning. This is something that can be advanced alongside green development standards. It essentially requires new developments to include a certain percentage or amount of affordable housing units. This is something that municipalities can enact. And unfortunately, so there is the potential for the province to be proposing a cap on the inclusionary zoning framework. If that happens, of course, it would be pretty unfortunate, because the hope is that you can be basically, implementing or requiring a higher percentage of houses to be affordable as time goes on. So you can see in 2021, the City of Toronto adopted this inclusionary zoning policy. And at the time, they were requiring condos to have 5 to 10% of affordable housing, going up to 22% by 2030. And then in 2022, Mississauga came on board as well. And we can see this year that more and more municipalities are jumping on board and bringing in these inclusionary zoning policies. I think that brings us to, this just reminder about the project cycle and how equity can really be brought in throughout all phases of the planning process. So starting off, just at the very beginning, making sure you're identifying within your own municipality who are the equity deserving groups, because those are going to differ throughout each municipality, of course. Again, going back to the whole idea of consultation, making sure that these communities are the ones who are being engaged, they are being consulted and compensated for their time as well, so that you're hearing from them what their needs are and how they can be supported. Within the data collection process, it's really important to keep the data disaggregated. That's another really important way that this whole process can be done through an equity lens. And then in the evaluation, when you're wondering how well are we doing with this particular action or policy or program, evaluating and getting that input from the community to find out exactly, are their needs being met? Are they benefiting from this? And then it really just continues in this iterative process so that you're constantly trying to make improvements based on what the equity seeking folks are telling you. So that's just kind of one final reminder we wanted to leave you with. There's another example here, actually. I think it's, the seed diagram, which is kind of a more, there are more steps in this process, but again, it just shows you all the different points throughout the whole project process in which an equity can really be centered and integrated. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back. So I just popped into each room and heard some really amazing conversations going on. And I think the most common message I was hearing was that a lot of folks do have GDS, but are kind of working on updates, and equity is something that's it's a challenge it is a challenge to bring into the plan. So I do hope that today was kind of a helpful and good step to kind of get the gears whirring and hopefully try to help you think about some ways that you can try to push for this a little harder. And the resource hub as well is there for you to be a source of support. And again, we're not experts on this, but workshops such as this one are hopefully a useful opportunity for us to come together and just share the barriers that we're facing and the challenges, and just feel like we're not all alone in this work. So what we're going to be doing is the CAP staff are going to be getting together and just going through all the notes from the jot form and from the breakout rooms. and compiling all of it and putting as much of it as possible into the resource hub. We will be sending out the recording as well. So if you missed any of it, you can go through and watch it. And as you can see up here on the screen, so the active transportation workshop was our first one back in March. And then today, as mentioned, was our second one. Coming up in June, we're going to be focusing on growth management and land use. A little break for the summer. And then in September, we'll be coming back to talk all about EVs and e-mobility. And then the final workshop in this series is going to be in November when we're talking about rental retrofits and renewable installation projects. So that's what's coming up in terms of the equity series. I also think we have a little poll just to get your feedback on how today went. So if you could just fill it out quickly before you pop off. I don't know if Gabby or anyone had anything. Oh, Gabby, I think you wanted to talk about low carbon planning, perhaps. Oh, and you're on mute, Gabby.
Someone had to do it, right? So I did want to kind of raise one of the other things we had on our to-do list for today was green development standards and low carbon energy planning, but at the neighborhood scale. As we were doing this work internally with the CAP team, we realized that there's actually enormous amount of overlap between green development standards and low carbon energy planning at the neighborhood scale. In fact, they're very, very similar, except the only one thing that we identified as the opportunity for equity to be advanced in low carbon energy planning at the neighborhood scale is the fact that it's easier to build the business case for heating of, let's say, for geothermal or heating with electricity at the multi-unit or the MERB level, the high rise, the heavy density, a lot of energy use and those things. So you can often build that business case for the MERB high rise sector on geothermal or moving towards a district energy system or something like along those lines, either at the building scale. But in order to move to the district system, which means across a community, you need to be able to access the right of way. That adds increased complexity. But if you were able to create a streamlined way for energy developers and energy utilities to use the low carbon energy utilities is what I'm talking about, not like the electrical utilities or Enbridge, because they already have a system perfectly set up for them for accessing the right of way. But a lot of low carbon energy utilities in the form of geothermal utilities are not regulated utilities. They are they are new for many municipalities and how they would access the right of way. There's a whole bunch of right of way issues that are already faced with regards to having to provide free access to the right of way for fossil fuel companies like Enbridge, which immediately results in a fossil fuel subsidy because of that free access to the right of way. So there's a whole series of right of way issues that we are going to be working on. But one of the equity goals of looking at energy planning at the neighborhood scale is that it can open up opportunities for building the cost-effective decarbonization of heating systems in new developments if you share energy assets across a development, as opposed to only having to build the business case at the building scale itself. Which the building scale itself is better for MERBs, high-rise MERBs, but it undermines medium-rise MERBs, and certainly doesn't isn't really is harder to build the business case at the low-rise development sector. So we did identify that as one of the differences between a green development standard, which looks only at the building scale, and the opportunities for looking at energy planning and sharing of energy assets and streamlining right-of-way discussion use for non-regulated utilities, opening up the decarbonized opportunities to mid-rise and to low-rise density. But we also know we have a lot of work to try and work through those issues. So we identified that we have that on the to-do list, but we decided to focus only on green development standards today because that is where many municipalities are at, with the vision to know that we need to start looking at low carbon energy planning at the neighborhood scale and facilitating that dialogue of low carbon energy systems at the neighborhood scale to help increase the equity of the types of housing archetypes that can build the business case for decarbonization right from the get-go. Sorry, that was a long-winded blurb.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that, Gabby. And yeah, if we did have more time today, I think we could have launched a little bit more into all of that, but we're going to wrap it up for today. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us. I really hope this was a useful session for you, and we do hope to see you at our future workshops if possible. Thanks to all the CAP staff as well for helping with the breakout rooms and for just offering the general support. And really hope you enjoy the rest of the day.